Hi, and welcome to the machine. What I want to do is I want to talk about why I think politics are a waste of time. So I want to start by talking a little bit about me and my personal journey with politics, what I think politics has done for me, like what I think has been the advantages of it, why this has been an iterative process for me, what switching my beliefs has often meant, and finally, why do I think politics is overall a waste of time. So let's start with me. So I used to be really involved in politics when I was younger. I used to do a lot of knocking on the doors for Democrats in high school, and I started a political analysis club, and I started a Democrat club, and I kind of thought it was interesting and good, and I liked hearing other perspectives, and I liked reading things that didn't immediately conform to my worldview. I liked kind of the creativity and the inspiration of ideas that I thought were a little bit dangerous or a little bit bizarre. But this gradually brought me down the road to leftism, where I was sort of flirting with some of the communist ideas, despite not really completely agreeing with them or not really seeing the argument about merit being particularly compelling, but thinking there was something deeply wrong with American social relations. Um, I grew interested also in social control and how that sort of thing worked because I find it interesting how people control other people. Um, and I thought that like leftism, like maybe trying to overthrow control would be valuable insofar as it would provide tools to marginalize groups and would allow them to sort of obtain power. And so as I got kind of further down the line, I took a couple of classes in social justice. Um, and I didn't really find them compelling at all. So we had a class which was the emphasis was on dignity. And I was like, maybe dignity is like this interesting philosophical concept that I could really wrap my head around. Maybe this would be something that'd be valuable for me. But I was really unimpressed with the class in the sense that not only was like questioning and dissent sort of discouraged, not only was there a lack of charity given to views that weren't the same as the professors, but it felt like the sort of stuff that was being taught to us was milk toast and wrong. Let me give you an example. So I took one of the areas in the class was organ markets, and they were talking about how these organ markets were destroying the dignity of people and the sanctity of human life. And I guess to me, I thought, A, I'm not very religious. B, this is not very religious, but it's trying to ground its arguments for doing something on religious beliefs, which seems weird. So I was kind of off put by that. But secondly, there was next to no discussion of the consequences or the sorts of things that would end up happening as a result of these organ markets. It was merely that like commodification is bad. But what if commodification is good? And there wasn't really any like reasoning as to why these things were right. It was sort of just asserted. And so I kind of grew a little bit disgusted with the attitude pedagogically, and I felt like I wasn't really fitting in. Another topic that was really frustrating was GMOs and nuclear power. I'm a big believer in evidence-based solutions to problems, and I found that the opposition to nuclear was rabid and stupid and misguided, to say the least. And I thought the opposition to GMOs on a social justice grounds is absurd. Like, why would somebody prefer to have people starving to death in the third world to not? And so I kind of grew very disillusioned at this point. I was struggling in school. I was having a tough time. First year was rough. And I was really upset that this is the hallmark, this is the pinnacle of academia, that we get half-baked explanations for things that didn't really quite make sense, but we were all supposed to nod along and pretend like it was profound. As somebody who, did a lot of competitive debate and felt very good at picking apart people's arguments and writing my own arguments and enjoyed creating, I sort of felt like this is not how I would create arguments for these things. And as a result, I kind of didn't like it very much. So I was also taking a political science course at the time, which was called Modern Political Theory, which had us reading some works uh, from Orwell, from Nozick, from Thucydides, And this was sort of like a great books approach to it. We had to read some Kant, some Rawls, and I really resonated with the Amartya Sen and Robert Nozick approach to things. And although these are like very different perspectives, I started to become more interested in a sort of public reason that didn't emphasize democratic values, because at the same time I thought to myself that the values of everyone having the same voice wasn't as important as everyone having a decent life. Like for instance, we often talk about how like fascists are bad, and of course fascists are bad, but if fascists are bad, then why would you give them an equal voice? And so there's a sort of like tension in democratic theory that I just don't think was adequately resolved. And so I sort of grew skeptical with this idea of increasing spheres of democracy. And I started thinking about maybe alternative ways of conceiving of things. And that's sort of where Nozick came in. He kind of gave this idea of proceduralism as an approach to solving problems. Instead of having justice be a set of institutions which maximize well-being for people who are at the bottom, and having that be the only consideration, the minimax. Um, I kind of thought the Nozick like pattern thing was a much stronger argument, and I actually wrote my term paper in the class on why I thought Rawls's theories, rather than being vindicated, were sort of ex post facto arguments for the Democratic Party of the 1960s. Like, why is campaign finance important when like starvation isn't? Like if our big thing is like open immigration, like, or like visitation, why not have like actually people being able to leave one state of nature and move to another? Needless to say, I kind of moved away from left wing thought for a really long time and started flirting with right wing libertarianism, which is this idea of a very proceduralist, very property rights focused approach to this, where there was no real hatred or animosity towards people who are different than me, but there wasn't really a compassion either. I sort of was like, I'm going to be left alone. And I started a club at my college, specifically designed to sort of promote these ideas and to make the arguments for them. But one of the issues that I thought was increasing in salience, which I thought was a much more important issue than the property rights issue in general, was the issue of free speech. I thought free speech was something that was very valuable, and the ability to meaningfully dissent. And that sort of pushed me in a slightly different direction, because I thought government should protect this as opposed to sort of this like libertarian laissez-faire approach to this thing. Um, but over time, I thought that that would be better served by more moderate, like polycentric arrangements, and I started getting more into the economic side of things, which brought me towards a more moderate libertarianism. But at the same time, I kind of grew disillusioned with that too, because of the fact that I felt like there wasn't like a logical stopping point for that, and I wasn't convinced that anarchism was a good idea. I definitely didn't like left wing anarchism. I didn't think it made sense. But right wing anarchism, like, this idea of like institutions that are aside, sort of made sense to me. But I kind of was like, didn't didn't really see state power as legitimate, but I also didn't really think that you would necessarily have the best results by like cutting away every single aspect of it. And so I kind of got to the point where I was like wondering why I was thinking about this, because I wasn't really going to be changing anything, and that votes don't matter. And I kind of fell into a more egoist approach, and that's sort of where I'm at now, where I don't really think that politics is very important, and I think that a lot of the things in my life have politics as a distraction, and there's a lot of distractions in life, whether it's drugs, video games, weed, alcohol, girlfriends, etc. And I'm not sure that a lot of these things are very helpful, at least when you're young. So, after kind of giving you the run through of how I feel like my own intellectual and political thought has developed, I want to talk about why I think my political growth has been an iterative process. So a lot of the things that I learned sort of had a Bayesian approach, so where they built upon the beliefs of before, they gradually overturned as opposed to like completely shifted paradigms immediately. One of the advantages to this is I would be able to respond to previous challenges to ideas more satisfying and adequately. Oftentimes, I felt there's a fair amount of copium or a fair amount of not really engaging with the strongest criticisms of a specific ideology. And when I changed my mind, it became a lot more easy to recognize and accept them. The other thing is, by changing my mind about the subgenres, I started to fit in less to the established categories. I feel like, well, there's a lot of leftists and a lot of Democrats and like a fair amount of right-wing libertarians. There's not as many like free speech nerds, and there's even less moderate anarchist libertarians, and there's even less like egoists. And so I felt like I became more fractionalized and as I approached this, which was good but bad in the sense that I got to see some side sort of niche topics that I found interesting, and I cared a lot more about those than about like this grand ideology. Um, which I think was a positive development. But I still think that the time I've spent doing politics has been not very effective. So I want to talk about next what has switching my beliefs often meant. So oftentimes, like you don't switch your beliefs one at a time. You switch your attitude, and once your attitude reaches a certain threshold, you tend to move in a direction pretty rapidly. So I found that when I changed my mind on something, I'd oftentimes lose a fair amount of friendships in the process. There's a fair amount of conformity and tribe that matter. And when you change your mind in an important way, you sort of tell your tribe that you're not quite one of them because a lot of tribes are bound together by irrational beliefs. Um, so politics is weird in that I sort of felt a need to fit in and have some of the same boogeymen and allies as the group that I was a part of. But oftentimes I didn't really feel like I had a strong kinship with everybody in a specific group. And I didn't really have a maybe the same attitude towards enemies that a lot of other people had. And so I felt weird in that like I didn't really get the appeal to group solidarity in a way that I think a lot of other people did. I think it might be because I'm a little bit socially awkward, a little more internal than other people, and that might have pushed me away from like really feeling like part of the tribe and getting the benefits and the corresponding drawbacks. But I started thinking about the fact that there are a lot of things that I'm unlikely to have an impact on. Like I have very limited time on this earth. I have very limited time awake. I have very limited time doing whatever. Um, and I don't really understand why I'm spending a lot of time thinking about things I'm not going to change. It's sort of like the serenity prayer. God, give me the serenity to accept things I cannot change and the strength to accept the things I do. On the basis that I should have the serenity to accept whatever sets of institutions exist that I'm not going to be able to change. I should focus on the things that I think I can change or that are worthwhile to change. Because, you can't make every change. You got to decide which changes you think are the most important. And it's oftentimes not clear what those are. The other thing is, there was a lot of emotional energy that came as a result of this, too. So I felt like I spent a lot of emotional energy on things I couldn't change. And I feel like that's a really bad feeling to want to have an impact, but to be unable to do so. Um, and I felt like switching my beliefs often entailed a lot of emotional energy in terms of trying to reformulate how I saw the world. But I feel like as time has gone on, I've started to see things less from a political sphere and more from an integrated rule system and what sort of things I'm able to do within this sort of system. Um, the next 2 points is I noticed that there was a focus on the external world as opposed to actions that can benefit people. I have this hypothesis that most people are very bad at thinking honestly and truly with themselves. I don't really think it's something that's cultivated a lot. And so I think this focus on the external world is oftentimes very mercurial and very hard to tell whether someone gets something right. So that is can be contrasted with views that can directly benefit people. And as a result, it's sort of hard to get the feedback you need to know if you're going in the right direction with things. And then finally, there's a sort of Manichaeanism to politics where it's like good and bad as opposed to like two sides. And most people tend to view things in like they're on the good team, the other team's on the bad team, or they're maybe like an anti hero. But I just think people are people and that everyone has their corresponding strengths and weaknesses. And I thought it was kind of bad to think in that sort of way. And it would be a little bit more honest to accept that you're a part of a tribe. With that in mind, I feel like I've explained what I think politics is. Now I want to talk about why I think politics is a waste of time. Number one, opportunity cost. The thing about the time and money and energy you spend on politics, that can be spent building things, things that are valuable. You could be building your hobbies, you could be building your life skills, you could be becoming more muscular, you could be donating to people. Every one of these things has a higher return on investment. Two, there's an aspect to like an arms race. So the more time that you spend on politics, the more time you're fighting with somebody else who's equally passionate about something but on a different side of an issue. So if both of you spend a lot less time on politics, you'll both be able to do things that make you happier than things that politics would offer. And that's one of the reasons why I'm kind of upset with this all-consuming approach to politics. And that, like, let's say I wanted to be a skater, like, why does being a skater have to do with everything else? It probably doesn't. And so I think that moving away from politics can sort of allow you to focus on constructive competition as opposed to, at best, zero sum and realistically negative sum competition. The next thing is pride. So I don't really think there's a lot of sense in being proud of the person you elect winning. I don't think it makes a lot of value or a lot of sense because if your pride is based on something that you are like only vaguely a part of, you're not actually getting the sort of personal accomplishments you need to get. And in an important sense, this is very sportish. People tend not to criticize people who are on their team, and so we don't really see the best ideas or the best people coming to the top a lot of the time. Oftentimes, it's the most shameless or the people who are willing to deal with this sort of constant media hellstorm, and that's undesirable. Um, Another aspect is that there's very little penalty for being wrong. Believe me, having been to that social justice class and having taken a fair amount of classes in college from professors who I didn't find were particularly open-minded, people can make their career off a bad idea, and there's no consequences to that. And it's not like people whose ideas are correct necessarily get a little boost. Sometimes, like for instance, take philosophy. Philosophy, most of the big controversial issues, philosophers are divided upon, which seems weird because you'd think that if there's like a right issue, you'd start to see some sort of convergence. Anyway, uh, other than that, there's also incentives not to see what critics are saying is legitimate. So politics encourages misunderstanding people who disagree with you because sometimes their most valuable criticisms are the things you don't want to hear because that would mean that you'd be isolating yourself from a group. And it's not good to do that because you don't want to be isolated. You don't want to be in this weird spot where you're not a part of any group and everyone sort of shuns you. So you are incentivized to be a worse thinker about this. I told you about the emotional energy being wasted. The other thing is that it's polarizing, so it's hard to be parts of multiple tribes or to fit in multiple ways. And so focusing on this specific approach to making friends only leads to temporary or fair weather friends insofar as you're involved in something. But if people are flux, if people are formless, if people are changing, this doesn't really seem to help. Um, Finally, many people in politics are dishonest and hence to attract the misleading type of politician, but also the sort of broken people who feel incomplete as the sort of people who are very active in politics. And so the people who are like really emphasizing this are probably people who are mentally ill, um, and or are more likely to be mentally ill. And I think that that's bad because you don't want to, because I think you are who you surround yourself with. And if you surround yourself with people who are profoundly unhappy, you're more likely to be unhappy yourself. And that's not really something you want to do. So to sort of provide a retrospective, it seems like politics is something that you change a lot in over time as you maybe have different values or you have different things you're thinking about or focusing on. Most of the things are going to put you in your own lane. And the more invested you are in politics, the less you're going to be focusing on living your life and doing things that are personally rewarding, which creates an odd feedback loop where you become more invested in politics and less invested in what you can do to be a happy person. But like let's say you are thinking about this and you're like, well, I want to live the best life I can. If you invested in politics later, if you delay your investment in politics until after you've got a good life, then that's one less problem you need to solve. And it's a problem that doesn't require the approval of everyone. So you should do that instead. Overall, I've become less of a political thinker and more of a utilitarian and much more of a self help person. And I think thinking about this a little bit more clearly would push people away from politics because it's not really going to do anything and more towards ways of improving your own life because that's something that can cascade. And if there's more than one type of power, you can choose to do a power that uplifts, a power that can cooperate with other institutions. And that's pretty much what I think. And thank you for listening.